Hi guys and welcome to this new lesson. It's time to talk about how Angular deals with routing and what does this mean for our single page application. So as we mentioned, Angular is a framework used for single page apps, which means that whatever link we will access, whatever view will be rendered, our browser will never refresh. The view will dynamically be updated with the actual content we want to show. So what I want to illustrate you guys now is actually how to do that. If we go back to our application before looking into the slides, if you remember, we have created only a home page with the first name and last name text fields and something to display that. We still have a few pages that we need to create, but if I click on About now and on Contact, nothing will happen because, as you can see, I'm just referencing a specific div in my page. So, what is ngRoot? ngRoot is the AngularJs core module for routing. It comes out of the box with Angular, but you need to include the JavaScript for Angular routing. It provides dynamic routing services. It's used for deep linking in our application, and comes along with a specific directive called ngView, which is used to actually render our content. Even if I'm sure you already know, by deep linking anyway, we mean all the internal links to our website. So it's an actual link that brings to an internal section of our website rather than the home page, which is called surface link. So let's look into how we set up the Angular routing. We do that during the Angular configuration phase, during the module configuration phase actually. Why we do that? We do that because we need to configure all of our routings before the Angular application bootstrap is completed and the view is returned to the user. So whenever the bootstrap will be completed, all of our routings will be configured. To do so, we use a specific method in the module, which is called .config. So after declaring our application, we'll write a configuration block and we can inject all the configuration related to our routing. Also, the root module and the service that exposes is an actual provider. And as you remember from what we have seen in the previous lesson about services, we can inject providers only in the config block. The configuration phase occurs at the very beginning of the AngularJS lifecycle. After the config phase, there is another phase named run, and we'll see more about that in a future lesson. How to configure our ngRoot. So there are a few steps required to start using that. As you can see from the screenshot on the right, we just need to include the actual Angular root script. It's true that it comes out of the box, but if we want to use it, we need to include it in our application as a dependency. We have to declare a configuration block, as I mentioned, and inject the $route provider dependency. And then we need to just start using that. So why don't we try to create a routing in our application and see what happens, right? So first of all, I would recommend that we create a new file, or actually a new folder, that we'll be using to store our views. And inside the view folder, we'll start creating our new file, which will be our about view. And we'll create something like a div with an h1 in here. And just this is my about page. I'll save this file. I'll call it about.html. And then I'll create another file for the contact page. Same thing in here. h1. And this is my contact page, right? So two very simple templates just to prove our point. So we have our view folder with about HTML and contact HTML. We now have to include the Angular root script. We can do that straight after the inclusion of the Angular core script. So I'll add a new line here, script. and then src equals, and I already have it in my clipboard. I'm including the code from the Angular code.angularjs.org website, but you can also do that through the Google CDN, or you can actually download the script and include it directly from your local system. The last thing we have to do is to replace the XYZ in the path with the actual Angular version, so we'll use again 1.3.15. So that's fine. And now it's time to go back to our app.js, and if you remember, we have already declared a service. I refactored this class a little to stick with the Angular best practice for declaring module. We have a simple controller as well. So now we can add our .config. We will inject the route provider service in here, and that's where the magic happens. So in this block of code, we will actually define our routes. We'll define a route for about.html and for contact.html. So let's do that immediately. Why have I injected the route provider? Because this is actually what we are going to use to create our route. We will invoke one of these methods, which is the when method, that takes as a parameter the actual link. So we'll do something like /about, and then it takes another object which contains the actual URL where we want to go. So this object can have a few attributes, properties. One is the template URL, which is the physical path where we have to read our view. So it's our views /about HTML in this case. So we do something like views /about.html. Sounds good? We can concatenate again a .when, and we'll do the same thing for the contact HTML page. So /contact, our object, template URL, and it will be this time views /contact.html. Sounds good? So what's going on? So what we want to do also is to catch all the links that do not exist in our application, and in that case we want to do something different. So why don't we create a 404 page in here, and we'll call it 404 div. Just a div like this, and 404 page, nothing special to be honest. So in here we save it as 404.html. Right? We have it. We go back to our app.js, and here we have another .otherwise, which is another method which is exactly to deal with all the URLs that our application doesn't know anything about, with all the routes that we didn't define in our config block. So otherwise, use template URL views.44html. Actually, I've forgotten to add the curly brackets in here because this is an object as well. We can now inject the ng-root module in our Angular module, and to do so we just inject it like that, ng-root, and it's our first dependency. We can save the file, and then we can move back to the index.html. We actually modify the URLs to be Angular-like. So here we have our href for the about page. As you can see, it's just referencing a div, and same for contact. The first thing we can do is to use a specific Angular directive, which is ng-href. This is a best practice, so nothing will show up if Angular bootstraps, and all the dependencies are not yet loaded. You won't see any weird links. And another thing we have to do is actually to add a slash in here, # and #. Why do we have to do that? Actually, the reason why is because the way we have written our root provider, our configuration routing, will deal with non-HTML and non-friendly URLs. This doesn't mean that there's no way to actually have proper URLs with no dash in front of them. I'll show you how to do that in the next lesson, but for now let's just use this version. I'll save my file, and if everything went right, we can now open our application. As you can see, I'm still running the app on my local server. If you can use XAMPP or the brackets live preview that I showed you in one of the previous lessons. So let's just refresh and let's see what happens. Maybe I'll save the file before and then click on my about page. As you can see, there's nothing being shown because there's something else we have to do in our index.html, and I mentioned that already, and is to add the ngView directive. So we can move here where we are actually printing out our trainee name, and below our page will show the content of the about page and the contact HTML page. So I'll just add a new directive, which is ngView. ngView. And I refresh my page again. And as you can see now, the content of the about HTML page is being shown, and our URL looks like /about. So let's click on contact instead. As you can see, this is my contact page, which is the content of the contact.html page, is being shown correctly. The browser doesn't refresh, and the content is loaded dynamically. The last thing we have to try is to type a URL that does not exist, so blah 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 blah. And as you can see, we have our 404 page. Let's have another look at the app.js anyway, because we really don't like just the text with 404 page being shown. We might want the application to redirect the user to the index of our app. So to do so, instead of typing template URL in the otherwise method, we'll type redirect to, and we'll just replace the 404 page with our /. So let's load again our app. Let's try to type something that does not exist. And as you can see, we're back to the app. Let's move to contact and let's change it again. And we're back to the index. So I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll look a little bit more at routing and how to change these bad looking URLs with sharps in front of them. We will be injecting another dependency, which is the location provider, and that's the one we will use to enable the HTML5 mode. See you in the next lesson, guys.